I totally stole hard fun from who? It's a quiz from earlier today.
Pepper.
But that's not fair. You know. You know the answer.
Do it? Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay,
Totally.
I never know.
Yeah.
I don't know where he stole it.
So I did some research, and he was the first one noted to have used it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So a little bit about me. My name is Susan. I am a recovering academic. I was in the Ivy Towers for many, many years. I'm a social psychologist, so I care about the interaction between settings and people and how that leads to behavior. And my focus of my work is emotions. And what I came to grad school really interested in, and this is connected to some of the speech stuff that we were, I don't see Willow, but some of the stuff she was talking about earlier today, is how do people, kids, learn what emotions are, right? So when we teach table or chair, I can point to it, I can feel it, I can see it, I can experience it. But sadness is a frowning face, but it's also impacts what you're thinking, how you're thinking, the speed in which you're thinking. What does sadness feel like? What are some words that come to you when you think of sadness?
Lost.
Lost.
Disappointment.
Disappointment. How does it feel? What in your body feels sad? Something here. I feel it here. Right, tightness in my throat. Right, especially when I don't want to feel it, I close it in tight here. It's really complex, and we feel. I can feel sad because I lost my favorite toy, but you might feel mad. So the same thing can cause different feelings, and your experience of sadness may be really different from someone else's. And so I was really curious, how do you learn what an emotion is? And so I spent a long time trying to figure that out and think about that. And along the way, I discovered the concept of emotional intelligence, was working with one of the sort of creators of that theory, Peter Salovey, and just really got interested in how do kids not just learn about emotions, but learn what to do with them, right? So the idea of emotional intelligence is that feelings influence how and what we think, and what we think influences how we feel. And so there's this cycle for emotions and thinking and behavior. And I was really curious how we learn about that. And if we are not living in a home that teaches us or models for us those skills, how do we learn that? Because we get really stuck if we don't, at minimum, have language to identify our feelings so that we can communicate our needs. So that's a really big stumbling block for a lot of people in their development. So I've spent many years studying emotional intelligence, designing programs for school districts to integrate emotional intelligence instruction into their classrooms. And it was all, training teachers to then teach with our materials, to bring to their students. And I became really curious, how can technology support this? How can it amplify this? And what does technology afford us to do? The other thing that I was struck by was so many of our programs were for early childhood. And so, early intervention was key and critical to that. And we sort of gave up by the time we reached adolescence. So if we didn't reach kids in preschool, where it made more sense, at least in sort of that context, to talk about social emotional skills and development. It was okay to hug kids in preschool, but you don't hug kids in high school. We were missing this whole advent of development in the adolescent years, and we really just sort of gave up. It was too late. So let's talk about teens. All of you were teenagers. What was it like to be a teenager?
Hard.
It was a blast.
Hard. It was a blast. What was hard about it? Let's talk about the hard. What are a couple things that were hard about being a teen?
Just trying to process new emotions.
Yeah,
You
emotional
don't
life.
know.
Oh my God.
You get feeling these new things in your life. You have no idea what to do.
Yeah, so your life actually changes when you're a teen. Like there's a whole new set of emotions that you feel, right? So that alone, it's a new moment. It's a new sort of learning time. What else?
You realize that no one really knows what happens when you die.
What's that?
You realize no one really knows what happens when you die.
You realize no one knows what happens when you die?
Yeah, and that's like, at least for me, I think until I was like a young teenager, I thought that like I knew people were dying, but like something happened and it wasn't like everyone was sad. But as a teenager, you realize like none of these adults that are supposed to know everything actually know the most fundamental questions on board.
You realize your parents don't know everything.
Yeah, so
and no one does.
Like, what adults sort of like, well, then nothing they know is super important because they don't even know this. But then also it's like, but then who knows? That was, at least for me, like a big emotional change.
Yeah, right. So we're able to process at that period in time a different understanding of the world. It's the abstract sort of concepts, the philosophy of living. You don't have access to that really as a child. So someone said earlier today that a child can learn anything, sort of, right? Like they can learn a lot of words, they can use a lot of words properly, but sort of this deeper philosophical questions of, you know, the existential existence, like that's harder to process as a kid, and you can't really go there, right? Because your brain is not ready for that yet. That sort of abstract processing.
All the physical changes too.
Yeah, so many physical changes, right? So I just pulled together some images of teens over time in, you know, movie history anyway. So we had all the John Hughes films that I grew up on, and there's the awkwardness, there's the love, and it's it's set up to be like the love of your life, the most romantic moment, right? And 16 Candles with the cake and Jake.
And those teens are played by 30-year-olds.
Exactly, right? So there's not this like reality of what really teen lives are, and there's you can search on, you know, what is our depiction of teens, and mostly, at least in the US, we have zero respect for adolescents, right? So we sort of speak down to them with the whole Parkland shooting, you know, comments about Emma Gonzalez and all of those folks from Florida who were really talking the way that adults were not talking about gun debates. You know, comments about it where they are so articulate.
They're amazing.
They're amazing, but they're so articulate, like surprised that they could be articulate, right? So even our sort of raising them up and our in esteem, we were talking down about them, right? Because we were so surprised that they could do that, right? So what I've been doing is really adding to Warren's 101 designer kit of all of those giants of child development and really thinking, well, what happens beyond age 12? So like, yes, all of that to learning, but what does the science say about adolescence? And there's been a ton of stuff that's come out over the past 10 years from Lauren Steinberg, Dan Siegel, Francis Jensen. These are sort of my Bibles for the adolescent years right now. On top of Piaget and Brunner and Vygotsky, those I think are all still relevant, and Montessori. But what we know now from studying teens' brains is that it's another really significant moment in development. So much happens in these years. How teens process risk is not the same as a child or the same as an adult. It's a unique moment. So they are more sort of set up to be motivated by risk, to feel that reward because of these changing hormones. There's a lot of pruning of the brain. So parts of the brain that are not being used as much begin to go away. You know, the gray matter doesn't disappear, but those connections, those neural networks start to disappear. The habits that are formed in adolescence tend to be the habits that last longer in life. So both good habits and healthy habits and unhealthy habits. Many mental illnesses, addictions begin in adolescence, right? So there's something really special and unique about adolescence that to me is really fascinating and really critical that we cannot ignore. Another really important thing about adolescence is that cognitive capacity rises at this speed. So they're able to process information in such different ways, and it goes up on this really steep plateau or steep curve of learning. But their emotional skills, they increase over time, but not at the same rate. And so they're exposed to all this new information, this sort of existential things, this new social relationships, but their emotional control over that, despite all of the intense hormonal changes, they don't have the same kinds of skills to regulate those emotions. So this is such a critical moment in adolescence or in the lifespan that I don't think that we've really designed for in the spaces we create for young people. The influences that we think about for a child and really wanting to prepare learning environments for them, preparing, sort of holding them so close. In some ways we do that in adolescence too with, sort of helicopter parenting and things like that. But at the same time, they're, where they're entering the world in so many different ways, isn't supportive of thriving development. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. So we're seeing in recent years teen mental health trends, negative ones on the rise. Teen depression has been on the rise since the 1980s. Hospital admissions for suicidality and self-harm have doubled in children and teens since 2007. The stress levels, the reported stress levels are increasing by generation. This is the millennials, that generation, are reporting higher stress rates than the matures and the boomers and the Xers. And teens are reporting stress similar to adults and exceeding levels that we want to see as healthy, right? So some stress is healthy, extreme stress, and especially stress we can't manage ourselves, which is sort of a hallmark of the adolescent years, is really problematic, and that's sort of linked to some of the depressions that we're seeing. Depression is the leading cause of disability worldwide, and when you look at sort of the onset of these mental health issues, again, it is adolescence. And so what can we do to create different spaces that nurture our adolescents to bypass some of these events, but also prepare them for handling, the stress of living or reframing it. And the costs are significant. We spend over $1 trillion on anxiety and mood disorders, right? So this is a cost to the nation. These are US numbers. But we know that treatment does help, and we know if we go further upstream, what I mean by that, but is sort of prevent the onset of anxiety, prevent the onset of depression before it sets in or before it gets significant, we can not just reduce these costs, but really increase the quality of life. So my bold vision, our bold vision at iThrive, is that teens have easy access to meaningful experiences that support their development and thriving into adulthood. And so what I mean by thriving, and this comes from the University of Chicago, their consortium on Chicago school research, and there's a great report, happy to upload it into the drive for folks that are interested. They sort of break out 3 chunks of thriving, or where we want to see teens go. Competencies, so skills, knowledge, and practices that they have and that they develop over time. A sense of agency, that they have control over what they do, how they do it, and of their world. And that they have the sense that they believe that they can influence what's happening, that they're not just a passive actor. And this idea of integrated identity, that they're not, they don't have different identities across the different contexts that they're in. And so not integrating who you are at home, who you are at school, who you are with one set of friends, having very different senses of identity in those places makes it really complicated and confusing to figure out who you are and how you want to be, and you're showing up in different ways in those places. That's not to say you can't have different roles or show up in different places, but you need to have a whole sense of who you are, and that certainly develops over time, but that's really important to get to in adolescence. So we aim at iThrive to create meaningful experiences for teens, supporting their development and thriving into adulthood. We know that teens develop within systems, and so this is a model that comes from Yuri Brofenbrenner. I was surprised, Warren, not to see in your list.
He's a good cook.
Yeah, he is a good cook. So this is the idea that we all develop within systems. And so our greatest influences are those that are closest to us, so our family, our home, our schools, and what happens in those places, what's modeled, what we learn in those places have the greatest impact on us. But we're also influenced by our culture and community, our neighborhood, our state and nation, and our global. and the influences might be in terms of like policies that are there, but also practices and norms, attitudes about self, attitudes about identity. And what's really interesting to me in this space, so I've been mostly focused on family and classroom in my research and the work that I've done and peers, but really curious about technology, and right now games in particular, because games cut across all of those systems. So, you know, if you just look at something like Fortnite, my son can be playing in our basement, but he's playing with a kid down the street, he's playing with people in the next town, he's playing with people in another country, and so the boundaries between the systems that influence our lives are really changing in really, I think, significant and interesting ways that I think we can really utilize when we think about creating meaningful experiences and what those meaningful experiences need to be comprised of.
So your son plays Fortnite?
Yeah.
How old is he?
He's 10.
So remind me tonight after, maybe we can, I have 4 lives of Fortnite videotaped in about 5 minutes. So, because I think it's really important that we all, maybe we can plug in again and do some shooting tonight.
Yeah.
But,
You can call my son, he'll play those.
yeah, thanks.
So Dorothy Batten founded iThrive. She is a philanthropist. She comes out of the media industry. And she was raising teenage boys who loved their video games. And she was also studying positive psychology. She was doing a degree in positive psychology. And she was seeing a lot of the concepts in positive psychology played out as her boys were playing commercial video games. They were collaborating, they were doing critical thinking, they were resolving conflict, and they were just having fun together. And so she thought, well, can we leverage that technology in those games for promoting health and wellness and building some of these skills that are necessary? And so she looked at what was available in the marketplace, and it was like all here. All like, you know, 1950s in tech, but nothing, you know, worth playing or doing, and nothing that would certainly interest teens. So she founded iThrive to ensure that teens are finding in video games the positive, meaningful experiences they need not only to cope with stress, but to discover their strengths and to thrive. She argues that existing games have this potential, and we think some of them do, but we can also be designing for it more deliberately. So iThrive is a nonprofit. I do have some materials in the back, but we're not selling anything right now, so I think it's okay to put that there. Warren? Okay. We work at the intersection of game design, and I would almost call that experience design. I don't think it has to be relegated to games, although we're tackling games right now to see what that might look like. Adolescent development and social emotional learning. We do a whole range of things, but this is our general process and sort of key activities. We review the literature. So I bring with me all of my research on emotional intelligence and social emotional learning and bringing that to bear on how do we design these experiences. We analyze games. So we do content analyses and quality analyses and interviews with experts on games. And we begin to talk about them and think about them, about how they can promote these positive habits of mind, this skill development. We have a curated games catalog, so I was really excited that idea came up earlier. Like, what is the clearinghouse for some of the apps or some of the games that are out there? We've started to catalog games by positive psychology principles. And so, you know, we took a bunch of games, we took the concept of empathy, we interviewed a whole bunch of expert designers and psychologists. These are from our prototypes. I'll talk about those in a minute. But we've started to organize games by these concepts, games that have the potential to teach empathy or to have empathy kinds of experiences that would lead to deeper conversations about it. We have game user guides. So how, you know, we talked one of the barriers this morning that do teachers even know how to best integrate a game into instruction so that it's not just, okay, you did all your work, you can go and play this game now, and the game may not be connected to anything else in the classroom. It might be used as a reward, but how do you really take a pedagogy and use games as a piece of that, as part of the instruction, but not the only instruction or not supplemental to it, but it's really you're designing a whole lesson and the game is a piece of it, and it allows for deeper exploration. So we're pulling together tips and strategies for that and creating hopefully a platform that we'll start to test this fall where teachers can share tips, they can share curriculum and lessons, and our goal is to get more teachers to know how to do this and have some of the early adopters help us codify what that looks like. We're doing the same thing with mental health professionals. And then one of our last activities is creating game design kits. So what is a game for empathy? What are some of the core ingredients that need to be there? So really cookbooks for these concepts, but that have enough freedom in there so that it doesn't, you don't know necessarily that you're playing an empathy game. It's like, oh, okay, now I'm gonna have to take the other person's perspective and see how they feel. But that's just part of the experience. But the experience is bigger than just that, but it's really core to it. So how do you design a meaningful experience for teens that's engaging, that's hard fun, but sort of the understanding or the practice of empathy or kindness or self-awareness is baked into the DNA of it. You start with that on equal footing as what the experience is going to be. Yes?
You select what games you put in the reviews. Do you interview kids as well? And have you put Fortnite there, for instance?
So it's not in there yet. We're trying to figure out the best way, and that's one of my questions that I'll ask of this group too, is what are the best ways to work with teens in this space? So our first sort of crack at the curated games list, we're starting with games that we know are popular, that are commercial successes and that teens are playing based on market research, and interviewing expert game developers in think tank sessions where we talk about what empathy is, what it looks like, and then we just have a mad brainstorm about games that might touch upon those principles. And then that's how we really started to cull down that list. And Barb was at one of our think tanks. I don't know if we did a concept at the think tank Barb was at, but it's a lot of folks, and there's a lot of fighting about what games should be on the list. It's a ton of fun.
So the brainstorm about empathy included a lot of fighting?
Yes.
To be clear.
Yes. But there was empathy for each other's positions.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So we're trying to figure out, like, then how do we triangulate that with what kids care about? And so one of the things I'll show you is a blog series that we're starting where kids are going to be submitting their game recommendations and why they think it needs to be there. So that'll be the teen game review.
And the end user for the reviews, is that the parents or is that?
Right now it's the parents. It's parents and teachers. We see those as the key audiences. And so, as a parent and I see, Fortnite maybe should make the list for something. I see a lot of collaborative play when my son plays it. I see a lot of problem solving together and just, pure having fun. So helping parents highlight, well, what's even good about this game and what could I have conversations about? How could I co-play with them or co-watch with them? And what might I sort of probe questions around, like, oh, did you think about what Julian was doing when he did that? And how do you think he felt when you stole his ammo? So that's the end user right now, not the teens themselves. Yeah. So our big design challenge is how do you actually create games that support teen thriving? And I think also that someone would invest money in playing. So the conversations today on return on investment and making a profit, it's so much money and time to make anything that would be potentially commercially viable. And then to add, to really design with really tough concepts like empathy and kindness and self-awareness and self-regulation. Not only how do you create the game and make it compelling, but then how do you sell it? Like, this is like the big question I'm bringing to this group because we don't know. Especially when designing for teens. So I feel like the cookbook that Warren put together is, here are all the things you need to do. But when you're designing for teens, for those of you who are raising teens at the moment, everything is about don't. Okay, so when you're designing for teens, you cannot tell them what to do. You cannot tell them what's wrong with them. You cannot tell them what they should do. Definitely don't try to fix them. Don't try to manipulate them. Don't treat them like children. So you can't age up content that was designed for younger kids. They'll see through it and they will, definitely stamp on it and not play it. Don't assume that they don't know, don't understand, and don't care. When we've done focus groups and design sessions with teens, something that comes up quite often is this idea of mutual respect. And so you need to have mutual respect for your end users when you're designing, I think for anyone, but that really needs to come out with teens, and that I don't know more than you do. I have some knowledge that you don't have that I can share with you, but I really need to respect you in the kind of experience that you want to play and that you would be interested in. And so we need to keep a lot of these don'ts in mind when we're designing. There's a whole field of serious games. A lot of educational games maybe would put into this that don't fly with teen audiences when you want to really fully engage them. And so you want it to be fun, you want them to want to play it, it needs to be relatable to their interest and their needs, but it definitely can't sort of feel clinical, like that we're trying to get something past them. There needs to be a transparency of what the game is there for, but it also needs to have this really fun element to it. So some of the things that we've learned so far is that teens are in fact hungry to explore and to learn. And so asking them to sort of take this journey with us and sort of help us figure out what those things are and how to do it, I think is a really interesting path that we're exploring. Teens are really diverse. They're not all Western, educated, industrialized, rich, or democratic. And so this may be, one product will not fit all in terms of the content, in terms of the genre. And so we really need to be thinking about diversity when we are working with teens, thinking about teens, designing. And teens truly are struggling to manage stress in what is an unsupportive society. So that has to be part of this. And what are the contexts that are surrounding all of us, but especially teens, in this moment in time, and how do we need to think about that when we're designing with them and for them? Teens absolutely need respect. They need real skills and strategies. They need positive norms modeled. If you go to look for great examples of collaborative relationships, great examples of productive conflict resolution, there's just not a whole lot I can point to. Definitely don't watch any sort of congressional sessions. Don't follow politics. Don't read the news. There's just not a lot of positive norms modeled. And I think games have the potential, and the media that we create, the technology has the potential to provide that, but we need to do that really intentionally and really thoughtfully, and we have to do it. And they really need close supportive relationships. And so I want to make sure I always say that I'm not arguing that the iPad, the phone, any kind of tech replaces adult relationships. How can we really create technology that makes those relationships more likely to happen, that makes them deeper, that makes them stronger? Because there's nothing more important in a developing child's life than a relationship with a supportive, caring, consistent adult. And so that has to be first and foremost, and then how does the technology support that happening and continuing? So we've done some research on what are some best practices that we can understand from the kinds of interventions that tend to work for teens. And we looked at game-based learning, and we looked at social-emotional learning, and looked for overlap between those two ideas. And my slides got out of order, hold on. Okay. I'm gonna come back to this slide. So let me go to this one. So to the role modeling piece. So Jason Vandenberg, he's a game developer. He's at ArenaNet, and he came to one of our hives, the same hive actually that Barbara's at. And he's this really sort of big guy with lots of facial hair and sort of intense expression. And he just blew me away with how he was thinking and talking about some of the ideas of what can games do and what can games not do and what do games need to do. And he wrote an article for our blog, and he wrote, teens are in a part of their lives where they are absorbing information about how the world works at an extraordinary rate. If we want to make a large positive change in our world, I believe the best route is to focus on providing teens with better models for the world. And he was making the argument in this piece that games have the potential to do that, but we need to be committed to doing that. We need to deliberately do it in our design, and we need to be really intentional. So what we've focused on being intentional about are what are some of the skills that are necessary to build when you're an adolescent, and I would also say lifelong. But social emotional skills seem really critical. So having self-awareness, so that's understanding who you are, how you feel, what your thoughts and behaviors are. So really having a deep understanding of yourself. Being able to manage your thoughts and feelings. And this does not mean getting rid of all of your emotions. This means really understanding, right now I'm really angry, and paired with self-awareness. Why am I angry? What's making me angry? What can I do with this anger that's productive? So there's responsible decision making also. So knowing that something caused me to feel angry, being able to say that made me angry, then gives me the start to a pathway for what to do about it. And that leads to responsible decision making. Without self-awareness, without self-management, responsible decision making cannot happen. Social awareness. So what are all of you feeling? How are we interacting? How does what I say impact what you feel? And how do I manage that? So relationship skills, managing my relationships in the world, and being really committed to making good relationships, but also getting out of relationships that aren't good for me. So these skills cut across all of the, I think, deliberate design that we're looking to do, that we're looking to see and support developers on, is, and not all of these at the same time, but how can these skills be built up within the structure of a game, or within the structure of a learning experience. Some hints we have gotten about how this might look is by looking at the positive psychology practices. So back to some of the work that Dorothy was really interested in, we found that the evidence base for some of the positive psychology practices is beginning to get more robust. And that so practicing empathy, so really practicing thinking about what someone else is feeling, why they're feeling that way, beginning to understand what it's like to be and feel with someone else. Doing that is connected to building relationships, right? So if we can focus on some of these practices that we can sort of create step by step for, might give us some hints of what we could put within a learning experience that would build some of these core skills, and also healthy habits of mind, like mindfulness or persistence or cooperation. But sort of piecing those two things together of, what are the best practices for game design or sort of experience design, we need to create opportunities. I'm having difficulty reading this. So we want to see the social emotional skills present in some way, sort of the opportunity to build those and push on those. But we need to keep those ideas of, what will matter to teens. So this idea of exploring, right? So the game has to allow for them to explore. If there's one way to get it right or one way to finish it, they're not going to have that feeling of agency, and so it's not going to be of interest to them. And so again, back to some of the materials that we read for today that I think are really important. In the world of social emotional skills, there's not necessarily one right answer. So you're not designing for one outcome or for one thing to be learned. It's an understanding, it's a process, it's sort of delving into that. And so that creates challenges in the design, I think, because you're not just trying to get to one answer. There's not one right answer like there would be in, a spelling kind of game or a math game. Making sure that you're designing something that is relevant to teens and to their experiences, but is not pedantic, not too childish. So what is their level? We know from market research that teens are not playing games designed for teens, they're playing mature games, right? So how do we create those games to be the games that they want to play, but also build in some of these opportunities for learning? And there's more about this model in this book that I brought.
Can you just talk a little bit more about that last point? So you talked about designing games for teens versus designing features for teens in mainstream games. Are you advocating that there should be a class of games that are specifically designed for teens, or are you advocating for best practices in mainstream games for teens?
Yeah, the latter. Because I think that if you can't design games, I think there's a challenge of designing games just for teens, but we know teens are playing those mature games, and so the big change I would love to see in the world is that the design of those games are designed with teens' best interest in mind. So that's big out there social change, right?